Hello, well I'm trying something a bit different today, and it's leather inlay. And I've got a skiving knife here that I want to make a little sheath for. So this is the one I did the baseball stitch handle on a while back, and I just want to make a sort of like an overcover sheath. So I'm going to do it using this technique of leather inlay and essentially draw a design, which is what I've done there, transfer the design onto the leather, which is quite interesting in itself actually, the way I do that, and then cut it out, and I'm going to be using a novel technique for that, and then do the leather inlay and stitch it all around, including stitch in a ditch. So lots of new things to try on this one. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. Anyway, I'll get underway. So I've done my drawing of the actual design I want to copy here, and what I'm going to do next is use my sewing machine to do a whole lot of little pin pricks, needle pricks, all around my drawing edges. And the reason for this will become apparent, but it's how I'm going to transfer my pattern onto the leather. So the machine has a bit to bite on. I've just put a bit of cardboard underneath. So I'll do this in a fairly fine stitch. If one does make a mistake with the placement, you can correct this later, so it's not a total disaster. Right, well I've now punched out my little pattern, and if I was doing this again I'd actually do a slightly larger stitch and I'd use some stencil paper. I've used ordinary paper and it has tended to rip in a couple of places. I don't think it would matter too much, but just constantly trying to think of little ways to try and improve all these things. So now comes the interesting bit. I'm going to transfer this design onto the leather. So I've got my pierced design here on the paper. This is the knife I'm going to be making the sort of sheath for, and I've got this nice offcut here of leather. So what I'm going to do is attempt to transfer this design onto the leather, and to do that I'm going to use some chalk. So I'll just weight this down so it doesn't move around. But I have here some ground up blackboard chalk, which I'm hoping is in a muslin bag. I can just sort of like daub over this and little bits of chalk will fall through and hit the leather below. So I'll take my little bag and I'll just do this over the pattern. Let's lift that carefully and have a look. Yeah, as you can see it's fairly faint, but there's a chalk little outline now. So my next thing I'm going to do is cut along these dotted lines, and I have a rather interesting technique which I have shown actually in another video how to do that. So I'll do that next. I'm going to put this adapted needle now into my sewing machine, and this is one which I've fashioned out of a very thick needle, and essentially what I've done is I've cut it short so that the needle just goes about 1 millimetre or 2 below the needle plate, but no deeper. I don't want it damaging the mechanism underneath the needle plate. And I've made it like a knife, so I've sharpened it on some stones and got a nice knife sharp blade there, so it will cut the leather, and I'll be using this within the machine to cut out the leather shape. So as before, I'm going to pop a bit of cardboard underneath just to give a bit of body for this, bit of thickness really, so it doesn't slide around too much. And I'll try and run the machine on a fairly high speed if I can. Mustn't breathe too heavily on this, otherwise all the chalk dust will probably go and blow away. I should just say that I've set my needle sort of movement, or the feed dog movement, to probably like, I don't know, 20 stitches, 30 stitches to an inch, i.e. absolutely minimal, so that I'm getting the maximum cutting each time. So as I go up here, the machine will cut the leather. Okay, so the machine has now effectively cut it all out. So I needed to do a little bit of trimming, but the idea is I can lift this design out now, and I've basically cut, this is a rose, it may not look like it at the moment, but I've cut my rose out. So I've just been raiding my leather scraps box just to find sort of possible colours for this, and I've got one sort of leather for the leaves which has like a slight patterned texture on it, and then I've got a plain leather for the stalk, for the stem, and then I've got this quite standing out, but I wanted something fairly thin. You'll see why in a minute, but I'm going to try and crumple the leather to make the rose look a bit more realistic. I'm just applying a bit of leather adhesive to the reverse of the leaves, and I'm going to stick my bits of leather behind. Alright, hopefully that will stick. It's only got to stick enough for sewing. Yeah. So that's the stalk now set in. So all I need to do now are the actual flower heads. Now to do the flower heads, I'm going to pinch the leather so it makes it look a bit more like petals. I'm just getting my sewing machine tension right. What I really want to try and do is have it so that my roller foot doesn't mark the leather. So I've been easing off pressure on my top tension screw on top of the machine. I think I've got it pretty well about right. I've got it so that the wheel is turning each time, but the marking I don't think is too bad now. It's still there a bit. It's a compromise. And just with my knee I can lift this foot, so I'm just giving a tiny bit of lift now and again to help doing the turns. So I've just put the glue behind here, scrunched it up, put the glue behind, and I think it's more or less set. Ditto with this little bit. What I will do next is I will sew around the edge of the flower to anchor in all of this. So I've now done all the stitching around the outer edges, and it gives quite a nice bit of sort of like definition there to the whole thing. The back of it looks quite rough, but that's not seen, so I'll be lining that over. It doesn't matter. What I'm going to do now as a final little thing, I'm going to put some veins on the leaves, but I'm also going to try this, what they call stitch in a ditch. So I'm now just stitching inside, so along the green leather, to make this all stand out. One could use a different coloured sewing thread as well if one wanted to get a particular accent, but I'm just going to keep it the same colour as it's fairly sort of natural. I'm finding that this flower leaf, the leather is just too floppy to be able to stitch on it. It keeps sort of coming up. So what I'm going to do is just thicken it up. I'm going to glue a little bit of leather patch on the back there, and that will sort of bridge the join, and it will just be enough for that leather to become stiff enough to then sew over. So I'm just gluing it now onto a piece of backing leather that will become the actual knife sheath. So I've sewn the panel now onto this bit of leather, so just stitching up the case now. If that's the case, it's all finished, and it will take 2 or 3 skiving knives. Good fun. So quite a nice thing to try, and something a little bit different. Certainly try some more of that at some point. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks very much for watching, and if you haven't already subscribed, please do so, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye from me, and bye bye from the new knife case.